Let's face it, the Skull Merchant falls flat in pretty much every aspect, except one. But what if you could use AI to fix her? Well, that's what I've set out to do today. Alright, so right off the bat, let's address the current lore for the Skull Merchant, but in a far more digestible format. Essentially, she's an edgy weeb that's cosplaying as a character her father created, and she kills pretty much just because she feels like it. So, yeah, she could really use some improvement, especially in the lore department. This is where ChatGPT comes to the rescue, and to keep things simple, I prompted the AI to come up with a more fitting backstory for the Skull Merchant in Dead by Daylight. And the result was actually pretty interesting, but I'll quickly sum it up for the sake of the length of the video and put the expanded lore and other information that will be covered, such as perks, in the description below. So, our new Skull Merchant is a man named Edgar Vane, a very successful businessman from the early 1900s. So essentially, he stumbled upon an ancient tribal ceremony that involved sacrificing human skulls. He saw an opportunity to profit and began buying the skulls. His obsession with the skulls grew, and he began actively seeking out victims to add to his collection. He became known as the Skull Merchant. He was eventually caught and sentenced to death for his crimes. In the realm of the entity, he uses his collection of skulls to terrify his victims. Which, if I'm honest, while it does sound a little bit generic in some parts, it's way better than what we've got. Next on the agenda is a complete rework of the Skull Merchant's power. Now, I will admit that when I was inputting prompts into ChatGPT for the killer perks, it essentially gave me the equivalent of a killer's power just split into 3. So just like a BLT sandwich, I'm combining them into one. After a painful amount of regenerated responses, I finally found one that seemed appropriate, so the new power is called Skull Keeper. I know this sounds generic, but it'll make sense once I get into the perks that the AI has generated for us. Quick disclaimer though, I'm not getting into a discussion in terms of percentages or duration per tier of each perk, as that would take way too long, and I also can't be bothered, so... The first aspect of the power is called Skull Hoarder, where essentially, he gains 1 skull every time he hooks a survivor. So kind of like Oni, but you have to hook someone to activate the power. So it's not that great. However, with more skulls comes more quote-unquote abilities, which I would assume would work like Fire Up. The next part of the power seems to be some sort of visual effect, kind of like a mixture between Freddy and Doctor. So basically, this causes survivors to hallucinate and experience visions of skulls and bones, but all of this only applies while inside the Skull Merchant's terror radius. Now you're probably wondering, what happens to all the skulls from hooking all of those pesky survivors? Well, that's where the last aspect of the power comes in. Once enough skulls have been collected, the Skull Merchant can perform a ritual to enhance his abilities, making him more powerful, boosting his movement speed and strength in terms of breaking things like pallets or breakable walls, and increasing his terror radius. Also, during the activation of his power, the aura of all survivors is revealed to him. Now it's time to talk about the perks. I'll admit, this one took some time to get working because ChatGPT was giving me what were essentially perks only our new Skull Merchant would be able to use. So that caused quite a few issues. But that was my fault due to the prompts I gave the AI. Anyway, the first perk is called Bone Breaker, which allows killers to break pallets 30% faster, which is 10% quicker than Brutal Strength, by the way. But the difference here is that survivors who are close to the killer when the killer breaks the pallet will be injured. We really aren't off to a good start now, are we? Flesh Hook is the second perk and honestly one of the most interesting concepts that I've come across. Although the description is a bit wonky, for the sake of the video, let's just say it's essentially a portable monstrous shrine, which is kinda sorta very overpowered, but with the right balance it could maybe work? Maybe I'm talking out of my ass here, I don't know. Finally, we have Soul Collector, which allows killers to absorb the souls of survivors upon injuring them, which gives killers a 5% speed boost for 10 seconds. However, you can only absorb 3 souls in one match, which honestly just makes the perk kind of useless. However, I guess it kind of balances it out, since the other 2 perks would probably break the game and make Survivor an even more unpleasant experience. But let's get into the concept art next. Now, before generating an image of this new killer, I wanted to clarify with ChatGPT what sort of weapon the Skull Merchant uses and whether or not it would be a ranged weapon based on the lore it gave us previously. The results were that either a straight up skull would be used to bash survivors' skulls in, pun intended, or the skull would be used to enhance a pre-existing weapon, but that's already been done. And I kind of like the idea of some guy running around hitting people with a skull. This part was honestly the most painful because I was forced to scour the internet to not only find an AI image generator that was decent, but also one that would actually generate an image close to the prompts I was giving it. Because of this, I've decided that rather than trying to find some golden prompt for the AI to give a single image that would perfectly represent our new killer's concept, I'll use the best representation from the AI, which I created in Photor's AI image generator. Alright, so now we have this snazzy looking guy. It's time for me to pretend I'm a qualified graphic designer and recreate the DLC logo as best as I can.
2 weeks later.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The Skull Merchant has been fixed through the power of AI technology. Do you think AI has improved this controversial killer? Let me know. Actually, speaking of AI, this gives me an idea.